Developed at the peak of the Cold War, the McDonnell Douglas F-15 Eagle was meant to compete against a Soviet fighter American officials believed was unbeatable. America's defense apparatus looked at the record-breaking speed and power of the MiG-25 and let their imaginations run wild. But the aircraft they designed to defeat this nightmare of their own creation was somehow even wilder. But as insane as the F-15 became, it was also the basis for a number of even crazier concepts. Let's talk about the craziest jobs the Eagle almost got. I'm Alex Hollings, and this is Air Power. When the F-15 as we know it now emerged from development, it came with an unprecedented combination of power, maneuverability, and advanced avionics that left it without equal anywhere in the world. Its powerful pair of Pratt & Whitney F-100 afterburning turbofan engines could propel this jet from the ground to 30,000 feet in less than 60 seconds, and up to 65,000 feet, high enough to boil the blood of its pilot in just over 2 minutes. In fact, a modified F-15 dubbed the Streak Eagle broke 8 climbing world records before the F-15 even entered service, reaching 103,000 feet at one point. Now that's 18,000 feet higher than the SR-71's stated service ceiling, and it did it all in about 3.5 minutes. But the Eagle is so much more than a rocket ship with wings. Thanks to a combination of this immense power output and low wing loading, which is the ratio of the aircraft's weight to its total wing area, the Eagle is so nimble that Boeing test pilots have gone on record to say that the new F-15EX, equipped with the new fly-by-wire controls, can perform aerobatic maneuvers that are usually reserved for thrust vectoring jets like the F-22 or Russia's Su-35. And thanks to a constantly improving avionics suite and the addition of increasingly capable air-to-air missiles, F-15s may have been designed for close-quarters battles, but have evolved into BVR champs. In 2021, the US Air Force announced an F-15C scored the longest ever reported air-to-air kill against a BQM-167 target drone at a distance that has yet to be disclosed, but is widely understood to be in the triple digits. With an unmatched air combat record of 104 wins and 0 losses, Eagles have been known to make it home after taking missile damage to their engines, and even after losing an entire wing in an air-to-air collision. Within just 3 years of entering service, the Eagle proved so capable that McDonnell Douglas began work on an interdiction fighter-bomber based on the same airframe, an effort that resulted in the 2-seater F-15E Strike Eagle, a platform that has not only earned its own acclaim in combat, but that holds the distinction of being the only aircraft in history to score an air-to-air kill with a laser-guided bomb. But while the American F-15 lineage would grow to include the F-15E Strike Eagle in 1988 and the F-15EX Eagle II more recently, this broadly capable platform has been the basis for countless other efforts, some of which are practically unreal. I mean, we're talking about strapping ICBM motors to its back here, but we'll get to that in a minute. We'll start with a proposal that was a bit more grounded in reality, the F-15N Sea Eagle. That's right, we're talking about a real effort to put the F-15 on aircraft carriers. You see, back in the early 1970s, Grumman's F-14 Tomcat, which was intended for duty aboard America's flat tops, was facing looming concerns about its size, its weight, and its complexity, prompting McDonnell Douglas to propose modifying their F-15 concept, which was in development for the Air Force at the time, for duty aboard those carriers. At a gross weight of around 44,500 pounds, the F-15 was 16,500 pounds lighter than the Tomcat with a similar combat load. That's the equivalent of an M198 howitzer with a fire team to run it. Because the F-15 had low wing loading, it was more maneuverable than the Tomcat in many circumstances, and its less problematic Pratt & Whitney F-100 turbofan engines gave it a higher top speed, beating the Tomcat's Mach 2.3 by a healthy 150 miles per hour or so. But better than the speed or maneuverability in the minds of some lawmakers was its price. McDonnell Douglas was prepared to deliver F-15As to the Air Force for a sticker price of about $28 million per aircraft. Now that's about $227.5 million today, and high as that might seem, the larger and more complicated Tomcat rang in at $38 million per jet. That's about $308 million today. That's right, one F-14 at the time cost about the same as 3 F-35s today. The Cold War was crazy. The F-15N concept swapped out the F-15A's existing emergency tailhook with a larger reinforced one that was suitable for carrier operations, and added heavier-duty landing gear and folding wings for easier stowage below deck. All told, the necessary modifications added only about 3,000 pounds to the aircraft, keeping the Eagle's performance largely intact. But for all the speed, power, and cost savings this Sea Eagle could have offered, it fell well short of the F-14 in two areas that were vital for its role in the Navy: its radar and its inability to carry as many hefty AIM-54 Phoenix missiles. You see, the F-14's absolutely massive AN/AWG-9 radar was the largest and most powerful array ever affixed to a fighter up until the emergence of the F-22 Raptor, and the system was purpose-built to be paired with those long-range Phoenix missiles to take down Soviet bombers long before they could deploy anti-ship cruise missiles toward American carriers. The F-14, which was the largest American fighter ever to see carrier duty, could carry a half-dozen Phoenix missiles, whereas the F-15 only had enough space below its wings to carry one. With additional modifications to carry more AIM-54s, the newly dubbed F-15N-PHX concept weighed in at around 10,000 pounds more than a standard Eagle, all but eliminating any performance advantage it might have had. Ultimately, the Tomcat obviously won out, but it is still fun to think about how different Top Gun would have been with Maverick at the stick of a Sea Eagle. Alright, now let's move on to the F-15 Active, which was a thrust-vectoring Franken Eagle with canards. Back in 1984, the Flight Dynamics Lab out of the Air Force's Aeronautical Systems Division awarded a contract to McDonnell Douglas to begin development on an F-15 concept that would allow Eagles to take off and land on short or damaged runways, based on the assumption that airstrips would be early targets in any conflict with the Soviet Union. Among the changes incorporated to this end were two directional thrust-vectoring nozzles similar to those later found in the F-22 Raptor, as well as the addition of canards, or smaller wings mounted forward on the fuselage that were actually made out of the horizontal tail surfaces from an F/A-18 Hornet. The resulting F-15 STOL MTD, short for Short Takeoff and Landing Maneuver Technology Demonstrator, could take off at speeds as low as 42 miles per hour, and it reduced the length of runway required for takeoff by about 25%. In order to shorten landing requirements, the program leveraged reversible thrust from the aircraft's engines in conjunction with those canards and thrust vector control to reduce landing roll by a whopping 78%. While a standard F-15 Eagle needed more than 7,500 feet of clear runway to land, this new F-15 could do it in just about 1,650. In 1993, the Air Force handed the keys to their F-15 STOL MTD to NASA for the purposes of their new ACTIV program. Now, ACTIV was short for Advanced Control Technology for Integrated Vehicles, and they were building off of previous digital flight control programs like HIDEC and the Performance Seeking Control, or PSC, effort. NASA opted to keep the canard wing layout, but added new Pratt & Whitney F-100 PW229 engines with 360-degree thrust vector control, making their F-15 Active, hands down, the most aerobatically maneuverable Eagle ever to fly. Now, to be clear, nothing about these efforts was ever meant to go toward production. It was all about gathering valuable data about different flight regimes, thrust vector control, and the effects canards can have on an aircraft's performance. And the F-15 used for this effort was ultimately retired in 2009. Okay, now let's talk about the Eagle with the ICBM strapped to its back, because I know I called this concept crazy earlier, but the truth is, it was a fairly grounded proposal. Back in 2006, a team from Boeing proposed what would have been a very creative new use for America's aging F-15Cs and Ds. It called for mounting a 45-foot rocket onto the fighter's back that could deploy small payloads into low Earth orbit. Now, this rocket-carrying fighter would have been given the seemingly logical, if still entirely dramatic moniker of F-15 GSE, for Global Strike Eagle. And it honestly could have revolutionized how America deployed hypersonic weapons or small satellites. The idea was all about using the Eagle's powerful afterburning turbofan engines and the incredible amount of lift offered by its design to ferry rockets up to high speeds and altitudes before releasing the rocket to ignite and fly the remainder of the journey into orbit. Launching orbital payloads from an aircraft would eliminate the need for expensive rocket launch facilities, while making it possible for F-15s to rapidly deploy payloads into orbit from anywhere in the planet with an airstrip and a hangar. Crazy as it sounds, this really was a pretty low-cost solution to a very expensive problem that America's military, particularly the Space Force, continues to tangle with today. As former Air Force Secretary Heather Wilson once explained, the U.S. satellite infrastructure was deployed so far ahead of its peers that it effectively amounted to launching an exquisite glass house before the invention of stones. In other words, America's satellite infrastructure is incredibly vulnerable to adversary attack because many of our most important satellites were put into orbit when there were very few adversaries there to worry about. This is actually one of the biggest focuses for the US Space Force, as there are a number of known orbital weapon systems deployed by both Russia and China already today. And as such, the US is looking for ways to rapidly replace satellites that are damaged or otherwise compromised, and the Global Strike Eagle could have played a big part in that. This rocket-packing F-15 would have been remote control, in large part because its custom rocket apparatus would have extended over the cockpit, making it impossible for a pilot to eject before the rocket had been deployed. Boeing's pitch called for the Global Strike Eagle with its rocket apparatus to take off and climb to around 27,700 feet, at which point it would pitch up to a 40.4-degree angle and increase speed to Mach 1.7. At 47,800 feet and at a speed of around Mach 1.35, the rocket launch vehicle would detach from the F-15 and give the fighter enough time, about 4 seconds, to pitch down and away before the first stage rocket motor ignited. The Global Strike Eagle rocket first stage was actually an SR-19 solid rocket engine that was sourced from the second stage of a Minuteman II ICBM. Once released, it would pump out around 60,300 pounds of thrust for a total of 287.5 seconds, before separating and its second stage igniting, which was an Orion 50XL rocket engine that would pump out another 34,500 pounds of thrust for another 289 seconds. And finally, a third stage, Orion 38 rocket, would produce another 10,600 pounds of thrust for another 289.6 seconds, which would be enough to ferry its payload into low Earth orbit. And throughout that time, our Global Strike Eagle could just turn around, come back in for a landing like any other F-15, and get ready to do it all again the next day. While this approach would only work for small payloads, we are effectively talking about replacing first-stage rockets with an F-15 Eagle. And what's crazier is that it would work. Wile E. Coyote-like as this concept may sound at first pass, the proposal was genuinely pretty pragmatic. It just never got traction within the Defense Department, at least as far as we know, because truth be told, it would not shock me to learn that there is an ongoing effort tucked away within some classified line of Air Force accounting that is continuing to mature the technology required to deploy orbital payloads from platforms like the F-15. After all, we're talking about the same platform that was piloted by Major Wilbert Doug Pearson back in 1985 when he launched an ASM-135 anti-satellite weapon at a satellite in orbit and scored a direct hit, making the F-15 the only fighter in history with a space kill. In other words, crazy as it may seem, this concept isn't without precedent. And while we're talking about strapping rockets to F-15s, let's talk about NASA's 2000s plan to use their F-15 to launch the Navy's leftover Phoenix missiles for hypersonic research. Now, this effort was not about arming the Air Force's air superiority fighters with Phoenix missiles for combat. In fact, by the time NASA was exploring this concept, the Navy had already retired its entire stockpile of AIM-54s, and truth be told, today's AMRAAMs actually outperform the legendary Phoenix. Instead, this was all about slashing the cost of experimenting with hypersonic flight and gathering valuable data that we could use to create further hypersonic flight simulations. Now, the Navy's stockpile of decommissioned AIM-54s already boasted a top speed of around Mach 4.3. That's right around 3,300 miles per hour, and the hypersonic barrier is generally considered to be at Mach 5. So it seemed like a great possible candidate for hypersonic research by pulling out its explosive payload and swapping in a variety of sensor sets. You see, the reason I said Mach 5 is generally considered to be the hypersonic barrier is because, technically speaking, hypersonic speeds are defined as the speed in which your interaction with the air you're flowing through affects the basic chemistry of the air itself. In other words, air behaves very strangely at hypersonic speeds, and as such, we need lots of data to pull from so we can effectively simulate what hypersonic speeds do to an aircraft in order to design hypersonic weapons and aircraft in a cost-effective manner. Now, the Navy wasn't wrong when they said adding a 13-foot, 1,000-pound missile to the F-15 would compromise some of its maneuverability, but the Eagle still had more than enough power to reach supersonic speeds with a Phoenix strapped to its belly. In the interest of cost savings, NASA reused as much of the Tomcat's mounting hardware as they could, finally managing to squeeze a single AIM-54 under the Eagle's centerline. Now, in order to be successful, Jones's plan called for having the F-15 climb at speeds higher than Mach 2, or around 1,500 miles per hour, with the Phoenix missile attached. Once it reached the appropriate speed and altitude, the missile would be released and have its solid propellant rocket motor fire as its guidance system oriented the weapon's nose toward the ground at an angle designed for the highest attainable speed rather than the fastest route to target. By traveling at such high speeds to begin with, and then firing its motor until it depleted all of its fuel, NASA believed the Phoenix missile could reliably achieve hypersonic speeds before impacting the ground, giving its suite of onboard sensors the opportunity to gather all kinds of data about the nature of flight at these velocities, and all for the cost of nothing more than some decommissioned missiles the Navy already had laying around. But by 2006, the US was looking for ways to cut costs associated with deterring near peers in favor of funding the ongoing global war on terror. This is, after all, the same year the F-22 Raptor program was cut short. And hypersonics, which the US was leading the world in to that point, were among the fields that were put on the back burner because the US government just didn't see any near-peer threats anywhere on the horizon. And yeah, we all know how that panned out. Now, believe it or not, this isn't even a complete list of crazy F-15 programs. There are still others like the F-15 Silent Eagle, which was an effort to inject low observability into this legendary air superiority fighter. Now, the result wasn't all that stealthy, but it was one incredibly capable aircraft. And I have similar lists that I could break down of crazy proposals for the F-16, the F-14, the F-22, and more. So let me know if you like these kinds of videos, and I'll put more of them together. And on that ends yet another edition of Air Power from Sandboxx News. I'm Alex Hollings. Make sure to swing by sandboxnews.com today and every day for all the latest in news, entertainment, and motivation from all around the force. If you got anything out of today's video, make sure to click like and subscribe down below, and leave me a comment so I know what I should cover next. And of course, don't forget to tap on that bell icon so you never miss a drop from Sandboxx News.